At my daughter's wedding, I caught her whispering to her wealthy mother-in-law, "She's nothing but a pathetic failure, nothing like you." My heart froze, but I stayed quiet, at least for a moment. Later, when the toasts began, I stood up and played a message her late father had recorded before he passed away. If you're listening to this, please like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. The whole room went silent. But let me take you back and explain how I ended up at that point. My name's Linda Parker, though most folks just call me Lynn. I'm 68, and up until a couple weeks ago, I believed my daughter Emily respected me. Turns out, I was wrong. Her wedding was everything she had dreamed about since she was 12. The event took place at the Davenport family estate in Massachusetts, a place straight out of a movie. Perfectly trimmed gardens and a mansion too grand to be real. There were 200 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and flowers everywhere, like a florist exploded in the yard. Emily's new husband, Daniel Davenport, came from money. Not the new kind, but the sort that stretches back generations. And Emily had landed exactly what she always wanted. That morning, I drove up from my tiny apartment in Springfield, wearing the navy dress I'd saved up for, just for this day. It wasn't designer, but I thought it was elegant. That illusion faded fast when I saw the other women. They wore outfits worth more than my rent, sparkled in diamonds bright enough to blind you, and carried themselves with that effortless confidence of people who've never worried about their bank balance. Emily looked breathtaking in her grandmother's vintage Chanel gown, the same one I'd worn when I married her father, Jack. Back then, we believed love was all we needed. Emily had insisted on wearing the dress, and I'd foolishly taken it as a sign of sentiment. How naive I was. The ceremony was flawless if you enjoy that kind of perfection. I sat in the second row, right behind Emily's college roommate and her husband. Patricia Davenport, Daniel's mother, sat proudly in the front row, pearls around her neck worth more than my car. She had been polite but icy ever since I met her 8 months earlier. Her chill came dressed in perfect manners, but it still cut deep. During cocktail hour, I stood near the terrace doors when I overheard Emily's voice. She was speaking to Patricia, standing near the flower arrangements, probably thinking the music would hide their words. But I've always had sharp hearing, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. Emily's words sliced me open. Don't worry about her. She's just a pathetic failure, nothing like you. She's never done anything worthwhile. She worked at the public library for 30 years. Can you imagine anything more depressing? Patricia gave a little approving nod. At least she knows her place. Some people from humbler backgrounds can be so eager to push into circles where they don't belong. My hand clenched around my champagne glass. Humble backgrounds, as if hard work was shameful. I thought of the endless double shifts I'd worked to send Emily to college, the sacrifices Jack and I had made so she could have music lessons, summer camps, all the chances we never had ourselves. That's when I remembered the letter in my purse. Jack had given it to me a week before he died, his voice weak but steady. "If Emily ever treats you badly," he said, "you read this out loud. Promise me, Lynn. She needs to hear what I really thought." I'd carried that letter with me ever since, never believing I'd actually use it. But standing there, listening to my daughter dismiss me as worthless, I realized Jack had seen something in her I had refused to. He'd noticed her change before the end, and he hadn't liked what he saw. Dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles. I was seated at table 8, far enough from the head table to not be noticed, but close enough to avoid obvious exile. My tablemates were distant relatives of Daniel's family. They made polite small talk about the flowers and the weather, steering clear of questions about me. I picked at my salmon and watched Emily glide through the room like she'd been born to it. She'd graduated from Harvard with a degree in communications, and now ran social media campaigns for wealthy clients. I couldn't deny she was good. She knew how to present herself, how to flatter, how to play the part. That night she was the perfect bride, the ideal daughter-in-law. But I knew another side of Emily. The girl who called me in tears when rent was late in college. The young woman who moved back home for nearly a year after a breakup broke her down. The daughter who sat beside Jack's hospital bed in his final weeks, promising she'd look after me when he was gone. Or so I believed. Then came the father-daughter dance. They played The Way You Look Tonight, Jack's favorite. Emily danced with Daniel instead, since Jack wasn't there to spin her around the dance floor one last time. I watched Emily laugh and glow, acting as though her father's absence didn't matter. When the song ended, She didn't even glance at the empty chair where I had placed his photo. That was the moment I knew I had to read Jack's letter. Not to hurt her, but to finally face what had happened to the daughter I thought I knew. While everyone else kept dancing, I slipped away into a quiet corner of the Davenport Mansion's library. That room held more books than our whole town library, though I suspected most of them were there just for show. I pulled out the envelope Jack had left me, his handwriting shaky but still unmistakable. On the front, it said, "For Linda, only if you need it." Inside was a single page, dated 3 days before he passed. His letter began, "My dearest Lynn. If you're reading this, it means Emily has shown you who she's become, not who she used to be. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this will hurt, but you need to hear what I saw in my last weeks." My hands trembled, but I kept reading. Jack wrote that Emily had been different ever since she started seeing Daniel, not just a happy kind of different, but something more calculated. She had asked questions about our finances, about his will, about what would happen to me once he was gone. When he asked why, she said she worried about my future. But Jack wasn't convinced. A chill swept over me as I read further. Just the day before, Emily had shown him brochures from a place called Maplebrook Manor, an assisted living facility. She had gathered pricing details, waiting list forms, even an application. Jack asked her why she thought I'd need assisted living at 68. Her answer? She was just planning ahead. The letter went on for another page, each line heavier than the last. He wrote about Emily's impatience with his medical needs, her complaints about the cost of his treatments, her hints that maybe I was getting too old to manage on my own. Then he revealed he had changed his will. Everything would go to me, with instructions she could not contest. More than that, he wrote, "I need you to remember this. The daughter we raised is still inside her somewhere. She's lost her way. Don't let her make you believe you're a burden. You're the best thing I ever did with my life. And if she can't see that, it's her loss, not yours." At the bottom he signed, "Forever yours, Jack." Then came a postscript that made my hands shake. P.S. I saw the Maplebrook Manor brochure in her purse again today. She's planning something. Lynn, don't let her do it. I sat there in that glossy, overstuffed library, surrounded by books worth more than most people's cars, and I finally understood why Jack had made me promise to read his words if it ever came to this. His last days weren't just spent fighting cancer. He had been protecting me from a daughter who saw his death as opportunity instead of loss. When I rejoined the reception, his words echoed in my mind. The letter wasn't filled with shocking secrets, just the clear, painful observations of a dying man who had watched his daughter grow colder and more selfish. He had seen what I had refused to. Emily hadn't suddenly become cruel. She had been planning my future without me, looking for ways to make me seem incapable of living on my own. I watched her across the room, gracious and polished, shaking hands, thanking guests. Now I could see what Jack had noticed. Every move was calculated. The way her smile never faltered, the way she guided each conversation so nothing could reflect badly on her new image. "Mrs. Parker." A voice startled me. One of Daniel's cousins, a young man whose name I couldn't recall, stood at my elbow. "Daniel asked me to check if you're enjoying yourself. Can I bring you anything?" I smiled politely. "I'm fine, thank you. It's a beautiful wedding." "The Davenport family sure knows how to host," he agreed, then leaned closer with a grin. "Between us, it's good to see Daniel settle down with someone practical. After some of the high society girls he dated, Emily feels refreshingly down to earth." Practical. Down to earth. If only he knew what my grounded daughter was secretly planning for my life. I thanked him and stepped away, needing air. The irony hit me hard. Emily was desperate to climb into high society, yet here were people appreciating her for the very qualities she wanted to erase. Her work ethic, her smarts, her warmth. All things she'd learned growing up in our modest home, with parents who valued character above wealth. But Jack's letter made something clear. Emily wasn't just trying to fit in with the Davenports. She was trying to cut herself off completely from her roots, including me. The women Patricia's age glided through the crowd with the kind of ease that comes from never once doubting their place in the world. Their confidence was built on generations of wealth, on never worrying about mortgage payments, or wondering if retirement was even possible. That's what Emily craved. Not just the money itself, but the peace of mind that comes from never having to think about money. And in her eyes, caring for an aging mother was nothing but a liability that threatened her shiny new security. As the reception slowed down, I knew the real night was only beginning. Jack hadn't just left me observations in that letter, he'd given me permission to fight back if I ever had to. And standing there, watching Emily play the flawless bride, I began to realize that his permission was something I was going to need. During the bouquet toss, Emily looked right at me and smiled. It was the first real acknowledgement she'd given me all evening, and for a flicker of a moment, I felt hope. Maybe Jack had misjudged her. Maybe his illness had made him suspicious of things that were harmless. But then I overheard her and Patricia chatting nearby. "Thank goodness that tradition is over," Emily said, straightening her veil. "I worried some desperate woman might knock you down trying to catch it." Patricia chuckled. "Well, at least your mother didn't try. At her age, remarriage would be rather pathetic, don't you think?" Emily answered casually, "Oh, Mom's past all that. She's focusing on quieter hobbies now, simple routines. It's probably best she just accepts the limitations that come with getting older." Limitations. At 68, I was supposed to accept limits, shrink into the background, and let my daughter build her glamorous new life. Jack's letter no longer felt like a burden in my purse, it was a lifeline. He'd seen this coming, and he'd tried to protect me the only way he could. I had a choice. I could continue being the quiet, agreeable mother who stayed out of the way. Or I could remember who I was. Linda Parker, a woman who raised a child, worked for decades, and stood by her husband through cancer. A woman who deserved better than to be dismissed as a pathetic failure by her own daughter. The next morning, I drove back to Springfield with my head clearer than it had been in months. Jack's words gave me a new lens to see my recent conversations with Emily, and I knew I needed to do some digging myself. My first stop was the public library, the one where I'd worked for 30 years. "Lynn." Margaret greeted me with a warm hug as soon as I walked in. "How was the wedding? Tell me everything about this fancy family Emily married into." I had always loved Margaret's straightforwardness. She was 5 years younger than me, but we'd started at the library the very same week. She was fresh out of library school then, full of fire and energy. Over the years, we'd weathered raises and budget cuts, cranky patrons, and technology upgrades that made us both feel ancient. "It was quite an experience," I said carefully. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something. I want to look into assisted living facilities in Massachusetts, particularly one called Maplebrook Manor." Margaret raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was one of the things I valued most about her. She understood that information was power, and sometimes you had to gather it first before you even knew how you'd use it. An hour later, we had a thick stack of printouts from public records and online reviews. Maplebrook Manor was indeed upscale and costly. But one detail stood out, a program called Asset Protection, where residents could sign over their estates in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care. Even more troubling were the online reviews. Several families complained of high-pressure sales tactics, of being pushed into decisions during grief-stricken times right after a spouse's death. The state had even investigated the place twice in the last 5 years for shady marketing toward vulnerable seniors. "Well," Margaret said, sliding the last sheet across the desk, "this place sounds aggressive about signing people up." "And that asset program?" "It looks like a way to strip seniors of their money." I thanked her and drove home with a box full of documents that painted a far different picture than the glossy brochures Emily had shown me. But more than information, I had the start of a plan. Jack's letter was only the beginning. Now I needed to uncover exactly what Emily was doing, and why. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Emily's old college roommate, Jennifer. She'd been at the wedding, and she'd always been more talkative than Emily when it came to family gossip. Pretending I wanted to send a proper thank you note to the Davenports, I slipped in a few casual questions about their background. What I learned surprised me. The Davenports were wealthy, yes, but their money wasn't old money. Daniel's grandfather had built his fortune in manufacturing after World War II. Patricia had married into the family about 30 years ago, and according to Jennifer's chatter, she'd spent every bit of those years carefully polishing their social standing. "Emily's so lucky," Jennifer confided. Patricia had been parading Emily through the right charity galas, introducing her to the people who mattered. She was already hinting at getting Emily onto museum boards. After I hung up the phone that night, I sat in my little apartment and thought about everything I'd learned. Emily wasn't just marrying into money, she was marrying into a decades-long social project. Patricia saw her as a tool, someone young, polished, and presentable enough to help cement the family's place in Massachusetts society. But that didn't explain Emily's sudden interest in my future, not until I remembered what Jack had written in his letter, her impatience with the cost of things. My medications, my rent, even the day-to-day expenses that come with aging. I pulled out my checkbook and flipped through the past year. She wasn't wrong. My costs had crept up. Arthritis prescriptions, higher insurance premiums, the paint job the building required when the landlord raised rent. Nothing shocking, just the steady climb of getting older. That's when it hit me. Emily wasn't worried about assisted living right now. She was worried about what would happen later. If I ever needed expensive long-term care, my savings might disappear, leaving her with nothing to inherit. Jack's letter had been about protecting me from her immediate plans, but my own digging uncovered something worse. My daughter didn't see me as a person with feelings and needs. She saw me as a financial liability to manage. That night, I made a decision that would have surprised the old Linda. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for Emily to make her move. I was going to find out exactly what she was plotting, and then I'd decide how to respond. 2 weeks after the wedding, Emily called to invite me to lunch. Her voice was unusually warm and cheerful, which instantly made me suspicious. Emily never turned on the charm unless she wanted something. And after Jack's warning, I already had a pretty good guess. We met at a trendy bistro in Brookline, one of those places that serves tiny portions on oversized plates and charges a small fortune for it. Emily looked radiant, still glowing from her honeymoon in Italy. She'd always been photogenic, but being Daniel's wife seemed to give her a new kind of confidence, sharp and dazzling. "Mom, you look tired," she said, kissing my cheek before we Saturday. "Are you sleeping enough? Eating well? I've been worried about you living alone in that little apartment." I ordered a salad and let her chatter on about the honeymoon, Daniel's family's vacation home in the Hamptons, and the charity boards Patricia was guiding her onto. It was like listening to someone narrate a lifestyle magazine, every detail polished for show. Finally, after coffee and dessert arrived, she dropped her smile into business mode. "Mom, Daniel and I have been talking. We're concerned about your future. That apartment is so small, and honestly, the neighborhood isn't getting any safer. We think it's time you moved somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." "Appropriate?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Well," she said brightly, "secure housing, medical services nearby, social activities. Patricia knows about this wonderful senior community just about an hour from us. It's very exclusive, very safe. Normally the wait list is years long, but they have an opening next month." I set down my cup slowly. "Senior community, Emily? I'm perfectly capable of living on my own." "Of course you are now," she said quickly, "but this is about planning ahead. It would give us peace of mind knowing you're safe." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "And the best part? You wouldn't need to worry about money anymore. They have a program, you can transfer your assets, and they guarantee lifetime care." There it was, the asset protection program Margaret and I had uncovered. Emily wanted me to sign over everything Jack had left me, everything I'd worked for, in exchange for a room where she could visit when it suited her and feel virtuous about taking care of her mother. "That's very thoughtful," I said slowly. "But I'm not ready to make a decision like that yet. I enjoy my independence." Her smile tightened. "Mom, I know it's hard to admit when you might need help, but Dad's been gone 3 years now. You can't keep pretending you can handle everything forever." "I'm not pretending anything, Emily. I'm managing just fine. The real question is, are you?" Her voice sharpened. "Because I've noticed you've been a little scattered lately. Forgetting appointments. Missing phone calls. Patricia even said you seemed confused at the wedding. Out of place." A flash of anger shot through me. "Confused?" "I seemed confused because I overheard you call me a pathetic failure." "That'll disorient anyone." Emily's eyes widened, not expecting me to say it out loud. "I never said that." "You did," I said firmly. "You told Patricia I was a pathetic failure, that I'd never accomplished anything, that spending 30 years at the library was depressing." I kept my tone steady. "I heard you, Emily." "That's not," she faltered. "You're twisting things out of context." For the first time, she actually looked rattled. "I was just trying to reassure Patricia. To let her know you wouldn't be demanding or difficult. When I said you were a failure, I meant you had realistic expectations about your place in our lives going forward. The mask slipped, and I saw the calculation underneath. Mom, this isn't about what you overheard. It's about being practical. You're 68. You need to start planning for what's ahead. I signaled for the check, sliding my purse strap over my shoulder. I am planning, Emily. I'm planning to live my life on my terms for as long as I can. And when you can't? When you break a hip, or have a stroke, or develop dementia, who do you think will care for you then? Her question lingered between us. That was the heart of it. She wasn't worried about now. She was terrified of later, about me needing care that would disrupt her polished new life. She wanted me tucked away neatly, out of sight, my aging handled like a business problem. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, I said quietly. But when that day comes, I hope I'll still have a daughter who sees me as worth caring for, not just a problem to be solved. Driving home, I thought about Jack's final gift. Not just his letter, but the truth inside it. He'd seen this change in our daughter long before I had, and he'd tried to shield me. Emily thought she was outmaneuvering me. What she didn't realize was that she was revealing just how far she was willing to go. A month later, she called again. I could hear voices in the background, and her stiff, formal tone told me she had an audience. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? Daniel and I have some family business to discuss. I agreed, though I knew exactly what kind of business they meant. That afternoon, I reread Jack's letter and prepared myself. Emily and Daniel's house in Brookline was everything she had always craved: colonial style, pristine landscaping, in a neighborhood where just the property taxes would bankrupt me. Emily had already plastered social media with photos of it, each one staged like a magazine spread. When I arrived, the setup was deliberate. Emily, Daniel, and Patricia were waiting in the formal living room. They had me sit alone in a chair while the three of them lined up on the sofa across from me. It felt like an intervention. Linda, Patricia began, her tone warm but commanding, we wanted to discuss some concerns we've all been having. Emily jumped in right away. Mom, you've seemed more forgetful. Missing appointments, not returning calls. Small things, but they're adding up. Daniel nodded gravely. We think you may be experiencing some early cognitive changes. There's no shame in it, but it needs to be addressed. I listened, and the picture clicked into place. They had built a tidy little narrative of my declining mind. And though I half expected wild exaggerations, what they used instead were subtle distortions of normal life. The appointment I missed was one I had rescheduled. The unreturned calls were from telemarketers and Jennifer, Emily's old roommate, not anything urgent. Patricia smiled thinly. The good news is we've secured you a place at Maplebrook Manor. They have an opening next week. We can make the transition smooth. Daniel opened a folder thick with papers. Power of attorney, asset transfers, healthcare directives. Everything is here to protect your interests. I looked at them, these three who thought they could herd me into signing away my life. Emily sat there nodding like the devoted daughter, all while planning to strip me of everything Jack had worked to leave. This is quite a production, I said at last. How long have you been rehearsing this intervention? Emily's smile flickered. Mom, it's not a production. We're honestly worried about you. Are you? I asked softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out the worn envelope I'd carried for weeks. Because I have something you'll all want to hear. I unfolded Jack's single page, and I began to read aloud. His handwriting told of Emily's probing questions about our finances, her research into assisted living, her impatience with the cost of my care. She brought me papers from Maplebrook Manor, I read. An assisted living facility. She said she was researching options for you once I was gone. Emily went pale. Daniel frowned in confusion. Patricia's face hardly changed, but I saw her fingers tighten in her lap. When I asked her why she thought you'd need assisted living at 68, I read, she said it was just planning ahead. But I don't think planning is the right word. As Jack's letter unfolded, his careful notes on Emily's calculated approach to my future, I watched her face shift. First shock, then panic, then a cold, controlled calculation I had never seen before. When I finished, silence blanketed the room. Finally Daniel spoke. Emily, is this true? Were you researching assisted living facilities while your father was dying? That's when I knew. This confrontation was only the beginning. That letter proves nothing, Emily said, her voice trembling. Dad was sick. He was confused. He imagined problems that weren't real. I slipped the letter back into my purse. Your father was many things, Emily. Confused wasn't one of them, especially not about something this serious. Daniel picked up the stack of papers from the coffee table, the power of attorney forms, the asset transfer agreements, the Maplebrook Manor brochure. His voice was low, but hard. When exactly did you start researching this place? I was just being prepared, she said defensively. Someone had to think about Mom's future. While your father was dying of cancer? Daniel asked quietly, but there was an edge to his tone I hadn't heard before. You were planning to move her into assisted living while he was fighting for his life? Patricia jumped in smoothly. Daniel, perhaps we should focus on Linda's current situation instead of rehashing old decisions. Should we? I asked, turning to her. Because I did some research of my own after Emily mentioned Maplebrook Manor. Did you know they've been investigated twice by the state for predatory marketing to vulnerable seniors? For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia looked unsettled. I'm sure any successful facility faces occasional regulatory reviews. Occasional reviews, I said evenly, about pressuring grieving widows to sign over their estates right after their husbands' deaths. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Margaret and I had compiled. That's what the investigations found. High-pressure sales tactics. Families rushed into permanent choices during temporary grief. Emily lunged forward. Where did you get these? Public records, I said calmly, keeping the papers out of reach. State licensing boards, consumer agencies, online review sites. All free. Anyone who bothers to check before signing away their life can find them. Daniel leaned in, scanning the pages. Jesus. These complaints, families saying they felt forced to decide immediately. High-pressure presentations. Regretted asset transfers. He turned to his wife. Emily, did you actually research this place, or did someone recommend it to you? The silence was heavy. Finally, Patricia spoke. I may have mentioned their excellent reputation, in certain circles. Certain circles, I said, meaning wealthy families looking to warehouse inconvenient relatives? That's a terrible thing to say, Emily snapped. We're trying to make sure you get proper care. No, I said firmly. You're trying to make sure I don't become a financial burden on your new lifestyle. I rose to my feet, calmer than I'd felt in months. The difference is this: proper care respects what I want, not just what's convenient for you. Daniel was still studying the papers. Mom, some of these families sued Maplebrook. They accused the place of elder abuse, of manipulating seniors into signing away assets they didn't fully understand. Patricia's composure finally cracked. Those are isolated incidents. Every industry has a few bad actors. Are they? I asked. Because according to these reports, Maplebrook has a program targeting recent widows. They pitch families during funeral planning. They push estate protection services. They even partner with certain lawyers and funeral homes. I watched them absorb that. Emily looked ready to be sick. Daniel's anger was plain, though I wasn't sure if it was aimed at his wife or his mother. And Patricia, ever calculating, was already trying to find a way to spin the damage. Even if the facility has had issues, Emily said desperately, that doesn't change the fact that you need to plan for your future. You can't live alone forever, Mom. Why not? I asked. I'm 68, not 88. I'm healthy, sharp, and fully capable of deciding where and how I live. But what if something happens? Emily's voice was rising now. What if you fall? Or get sick? Or need constant care? You can't expect us to drop everything and handle it. There it was, the truth behind all the concern. She wasn't afraid of my present. She was afraid of a future where my needs might interfere with her carefully constructed new life. I don't expect you to take care of me, Emily, I said quietly. I expect you to respect my right to choose my own life. Those choices affect other people, Patricia said sharply. Family decisions should be made collectively, considering everyone's interests. Everyone's interests, I repeated slowly. And tell me, Patricia, what exactly are your interests here? Patricia straightened, sliding her social mask firmly back into place. My interest is seeing this family function harmoniously. Emily is my daughter-in-law now, and her welfare is my concern.
And my welfare? I asked. Does that concern you at all?
Of course, she said smoothly. Which is why we think Maplebrook would be perfect for you. Security, medical care on hand, social activities with people your own age. Even caught pushing a facility with a tainted reputation, she was still trying to sell me. I almost had to admire her persistence. Patricia, I said gently, I spent 30 years working in a public library.
Do you know what that taught me?
How to research thoroughly. How to spot inconsistencies in people's stories. And how to help folks find the information they need to make smart decisions. Daniel looked up from the complaint documents. What kind of inconsistencies? Well, for starters, I said, when someone swears they've researched a facility, but all their information comes straight from glossy brochures instead of independent sources. Or when someone is very eager for a certain outcome, but can't explain why that outcome matters to them personally. I turned my eyes directly on Patricia.
Emily rushed to take control.
Mom, you're being paranoid. We're trying to help you.
Are you?
I asked softly. Because help usually means asking what the person wants, not dictating what they're going to do. I sank back into the chair, realizing the ground was shifting. Emily, in all these talks about my future, have you once asked me what I want? Of course we want what's best for you.
That's not what I asked, I pressed. Have you asked me what I want?
The silence stretched. Finally, Daniel spoke.
Then what do you want, Linda?
I want to live in my own apartment as long as I can. I want to make my own decisions, about my health, my money, my social life. I want to be treated like a capable adult, not a problem to be managed. And most of all, I paused, meeting each of their eyes, I want my daughter to see me as someone worth respecting, not just an obligation to check off the list.
Emily's eyes filled. I do respect you. I'm scared, Mom.
I'm scared something will happen to you, and I won't know how to handle it. For the first time that night, her voice carried something real. Emily, I said softly, being scared is normal. But fear doesn't give you the right to control another person's life. I'm not trying to control you, she whispered. I'm trying to protect you.
Protect me from what? I asked. From living on my own? From making mistakes? From having the dignity of my own choices?
I reached across and took her hand. Sweetheart, I've been taking care of myself for 68 years.
I raised you. I stood by your father through cancer.
I managed a staff and a library budget. Why now do you think I can't manage my own life?
Daniel nodded slowly.
She's right, Emily.
Your mother seems sharp as ever. Patricia made one last attempt.
But the financial protections at Maplebrook are designed to protect the facility's revenue stream, I cut in, not the residents. I leaned forward. Patricia, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I can read a financial document, and I can spot a bad deal. Emily dabbed her eyes with a napkin. So what happens now? You just go back to your apartment and act like none of this happened. I go back to my apartment and keep living my life, I said. And you go back to yours, and stop trying to manage mine. Maybe, if you can learn to see me as an equal instead of a dependent, we can rebuild something between us. But what if you do need help someday? She asked quietly. Then I'll ask for it, I said firmly. And if you're willing to offer it with respect, without trying to take over, maybe we'll work something out. I paused at the door. But Emily, if I ever need care, it will be my decision.
Not yours. Not Patricia's.
And certainly not some facility that sees me as a paycheck. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Jack's letter had armed me, but my own research had done even more. It had confirmed I was right to resist. And maybe most important, I'd glimpsed something behind Emily's calculation.
Not just cold ambition, but fear.
A daughter terrified of what it means when parents grow old. 3 weeks later, Emily called again.
Can we meet for coffee? Just the two of us.
No Daniel, no Patricia.
No agenda. I was skeptical, but curious.
We chose a small cafe near the library, neutral ground.
Emily arrived looking different. Tired. Less polished.
Her perfect composure cracked in ways I'd never seen.
"I've been thinking about what you said," she began right away. "About not asking what you wanted.
About treating you like a problem instead of a person." I waited, letting her continue. I told her I'd read that line before. When I asked her why she thought you'd need assisted living at 68, she said it was just planning ahead.
I kept going, my voice steady. "But I've been watching her, Emily, and planning doesn't cover it."
As I read Jack's notes about Emily's careful, clinical approach to my future, I watched her face move from shock to panic and then to a cold, steady calculation I'd never seen before. When I finished, the room felt as if someone had turned the lights out.
Daniel finally spoke, low and controlled. "Emily, is this true?
Were you looking into assisted living while your father was dying?"
That's when I knew this was not the end of a conversation, but the opening of something much larger.
Emily's voice trembled.
"That letter proves nothing. Dad was sick, confused."
She tried to fold the conversation back into explanation, but I wasn't done. "Your father was many things, Emily, but confused wasn't one of them, not about something this important." Daniel's eyes slid across the paperwork on the table. The power of attorney forms, the asset transfer contracts, the Maplebrook Manor brochure. "When did you start researching this place?" he asked.
Emily flailed a little. "I was just planning ahead.
Someone had to think about Mom's future."
"While your father was fighting for his life?"
Daniel asked quietly, and there was an edge to it that made the room go colder. Patricia tried to redirect us. "Maybe we should focus on Linda's current needs, not past decisions."
I turned to her. "Should we?"
"Because I did my own digging after Emily mentioned Maplebrook. Did you know they've been investigated, twice, by the state for aggressive marketing to vulnerable seniors?" For the first time, Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Any successful facility gets occasional reviews," she said, but I had the folder, Margaret. "Excuse me, Carol," and I slid it across so they could see the headlines and the complaints. The records show high-pressure tactics. Families rushed into decisions while grieving. People said they felt pressured to sign asset transfer agreements immediately. Emily lunged for the papers. "Where did you get these?" she demanded. "Public records," I said. "State licensing files, consumer protection complaints, web reviews, all public. Anyone who bothers to check can find them." Daniel scanned a page, muttering, "Jesus."
"Complaints about feeling forced to decide.
Regretted transfers."
He looked at Emily.
"Did you research Maplebrook, or did someone suggest it to you?" The silence that followed said more than any of them would. Patricia finally admitted, stiffly, "I mentioned its reputation in certain circles." "Certain circles," I said, "meaning wealthy families looking to warehouse inconvenient relatives?"
Emily snapped. "That's cruel.
"We're trying to make sure you get proper care." "No," I said and stood up slowly, calmer than I felt. "You're trying to make sure I'm not a financial burden on your new life." I opened my purse and took out Jack's letter again. I read aloud about Emily's questions about our finances, the brochure she'd brought him about Maplebrook, the way she'd pushed the idea of a facility as if it were a checklist.
Emily went pale. Daniel frowned.
Patricia's face didn't change much, but her hands tightened. I watched them realize that the neat plan they'd rehearsed was unraveling. "Some of these families sued Maplebrook," Daniel said, voice flat. "They accused the place of elder abuse, of manipulating seniors into signing over assets they didn't fully understand." Patricia tried to shrug it off as isolated incidents.
I asked, "Are they?"
"Because the records show Maplebrook specifically targets recent widows, marketing during funeral planning, offering estate protection packages, even referrals through certain lawyers and funeral homes."
"They processed that." Emily looked sick.
Daniel looked angry in a raw way I'd never seen before. Patricia began calculating how to spin it back. "Even if the facility has issues," Emily said, desperately, "you still need to plan for your future."
"You can't live alone forever." "Why can't I?" I asked.
"I'm 68, not 88. I'm healthy, sharp, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Her voice rose.
"But what if something happens?
If you fall, get sick, need constant care, we can't drop everything."
There it was, plain and ugly. The fear behind the concern.
She wasn't worried about me now. She was terrified that my future needs would interfere with hers. I'm not asking you to become my full-time caregiver, I said. I'm asking you to respect my right to choose how I live. Patricia cut in, sharp. Family decisions affect everyone. They should be made collectively. Everyone's interests, I echoed, and then I asked the question they'd avoided. But have any of you asked me what I actually want?
The room fell quiet. Daniel said, "What do you want, Linda?"
I told them, I want to stay in my apartment as long as I can. I want to control my money, my health care, my social life. I want to be treated as a competent adult, not a problem to manage. I want my daughter to see me as a person worthy of respect, not a liability to be moved out of the way.
Emily's eyes filled. For once she sounded small and real. "I'm scared," she admitted through tears. "I watched you take care of Dad. I don't know if I can do that."
That honesty shifted something inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but seeing the frightened woman under the sharp edges.
We talked.
She said she'd seen a therapist who helped her separate planning from control, helped her understand that treating me like I was already incapacitated left no room for me to participate in my future. She told me Daniel had been horrified when he realized the parallels to his grandfather's business partners trying to force him to sell when dementia hit. Patricia, she admitted, wanted to handle things quietly, keep it all neat. She even called it the Linda situation, which made me laugh despite myself. Emily apologized, for calling me a failure, for trying to warehouse me, for treating me like a burden. She reached across and took my hand. "I don't know if I can be the daughter you deserve," she said, "but I want to try."
"You don't have to be perfect," I told her. "Just see me as a person. Ask me before you make major decisions about my life." She nodded. "Deal."
"But if you ever need real help, not just normal aging stuff, will you let me be part of the solution?"
I thought of the old me, who would have promised to shoulder everything alone.
Jack's letter had taught me the cost of protecting people from hard truths. "I'll tell you," I said, "but being part of the solution means respecting my choices, even if you wouldn't make the same ones." She seemed relieved, and she paused before the last thing she said.
"By the way," she added softly, "I'm glad he wrote it. Not because of what he said about me, but because it means he was still protecting you after he was gone.
I hope someday I can love someone like that." Driving home, I felt something fragile and hopeful. The daughter I'd raised was still there, messy and scared, but capable of change. It wouldn't be the same as before, but maybe, with honesty and time, it could be better. 6 months later, in my favorite chair, my phone buzzed with Emily's weekly check-in. She asked, genuinely, "How was your week?" I told her about lunch with Carol, the library book club, and that novel she'd recommended. I mentioned Robert, Henry, the retired English professor I'd met at a library lecture.
"We'd been seeing each other for 3 months, quietly, and he treated me like an equal." "How are things with him?" Emily asked, careful. "Very well," I said.
"He's intelligent, kind, and he treats me like an adult who can make her own choices." She laughed, pleased for me. "You deserve that," she said, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I listened as Emily folded her hands around her coffee cup and told me she'd been seeing a therapist to figure out why she'd pushed so hard to get me into that place. She asked when the fear started, and she told me it came when Dad got sick, when she watched me care for him and realized loving someone doesn't stop them from getting older or needing help. Her voice broke as she said she panicked at the thought of having to do that work, that she didn't think she was strong or patient enough to care for me the way I'd cared for him. Hearing that, something shifted in me, not forgiveness exactly, but a softening. I told her no one expects her to be a professional caregiver, and she wiped her eyes and asked what would happen if I got sick like Dad did. I said we'd figure it out together, but that didn't mean she could sign away my independence now. She told me the therapist had helped her see the difference between planning and controlling, and that treating me like I was already incapacitated had been wrong. For the first time that day I could see the scared, imperfect woman under the sharp edges, someone who could change. She laughed a little at Patricia. She'd called the whole thing the Linda situation, which made me smile despite myself, and then she apologized. She said she was sorry for calling me a failure, for trying to warehouse me, for treating me like a burden. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't know if I can be the daughter you deserve," she said, "but I want to try." I told her she didn't have to be perfect, only to see me as a person and to ask my opinion before making big decisions. She agreed, and asked one last thing: if I ever needed real help, would I let her be part of the solution? I promised I would, as long as she respected my choices. On the ride home I felt something fragile and hopeful. My daughter was still there, scared but willing. Months later, our check-ins became routine. She called to ask about my week, genuinely interested in small things: lunch with Carol, book club at the library, the novel she'd recommended. I told her about Henry, the retired English professor I'd been seeing slowly and happily, and she was pleased. Then Michael called out of the blue, gracious, apologetic, and invited me to join a family trip to Europe as their guest, promising freedom and independence, not an obligation. I sat with that generous surprise and realized how much had changed in a year, from being pushed toward Maplebrook to being invited to see the world. Packing for Ireland, Emily showed up with coffee and pastries, and we sat folding sweaters and talking honestly about fear, responsibility, and the hard parts of love that can't be outsourced. I think Dad would be proud of both of us, Emily said softly. You, for standing up for yourself. And me, for finally learning to see you as a person, not a problem. He'd definitely be proud, I agreed. And probably relieved that he doesn't have to haunt Patricia for pushing questionable senior living facilities. We both laughed at that thought. Patricia had changed her approach to the family, though I suspected it was less about any real change of heart and more about preserving her social image. That was fine by me. I didn't need Patricia to love me. I only needed her to respect my autonomy. Mom, before you leave for Ireland, there's something I need to say. I stopped folding sweaters and turned to her. Thank you, for not giving up on me. That night, when you read Dad's letter, you could have just exposed everything I was planning and walked away. You could have written me off as selfish, unworthy of being your daughter. I thought about it, I admitted honestly. But you didn't. You gave me the chance to see what I'd become, and to choose something better. Not everyone would have done that. I sat down beside her. Emily, you're my daughter. Not because you're perfect, but because we're family. Real family doesn't disappear when people make mistakes. It just means we have to work harder to be honest with each other. She squeezed my hand. I love you, Mom. Not for what you do for me, or for what you represent in my life. I love you because you're Linda Parker, a woman who worked 30 years at a job she loved, who raised a stubborn daughter with patience, and who had the courage to fight for her dignity when others tried to take it away. As we hugged goodbye, I thought about the road that had brought us here. The pain of hearing my own child call me a pathetic failure. The fear of losing my independence to someone else's convenience. And the discovery that I was stronger, and worth more, than I had ever let myself believe. Jack's letter had started it all. But the real victory wasn't just in reading his words, it was in learning to see myself the way he'd always seen me. Someone worth respecting, worth fighting for, worth loving exactly as I was. Tomorrow, I would board a plane for Ireland. Not as a burden being managed, but as Linda Parker, 69 years old, finally taking an adventure I'd dreamed about for decades. Some victories don't come with parades. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply refusing to fade away when others want you invisible. And that, I thought as I zipped my suitcase, was exactly the kind of legacy Jack would have wanted me to create. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments.